This lesson is over slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. The objective is students to be able to identify parallel and perpendicular lines by their equation. So first off, if two non-vertical lines are parallel, then their slopes are equal. If the slopes of two distinct non-vertical lines are equal, then the lines are parallel. So if lines are parallel, their slopes are equal. If the slopes are equal, then the lines are parallel, and any two vertical lines or horizontal lines are parallel. So you have two vertical lines are parallel, two horizontal lines are parallel. So are the following lines parallel? So what we did in the last lesson, we talked about slope-intercept form. Remember, we have y is equal to mx plus b. When we're looking to see if they're parallel, all we're looking at is this m. Now, earlier when we said they're equal, that's the same thing as saying they are the same, because you heard me say that a lot. Parallel lines have the same slope. So in one, do these have the same slope? This one's -8, this one's 1/4, so no, they are not parallel. Over here, we have 3 and 3. Those are parallel. They're the same. And the best part about this is we don't have to pay attention at all to the y-intercept. This y-intercept could be 21. It could be 321. It doesn't matter. If the slopes are the same, they're parallel. They could be really far apart. That's okay. Now, this one, we have 7 and -7. They seem like they're really close to being the same, but they are not. One's 7, one's -7, so not parallel. And the last one we have -x and -x. Now remember, a -x is actually -1. The slope would be -1 for that one. But indeed they are the same, so they are parallel. So now we're talking about perpendicular lines. So two non-vertical lines are perpendicular, then the product of their slope is -1. So you multiply their slopes together, it's -1. We'll talk about an easier way to look at that later. Any slopes of two lines that have a product of -1, then the lines are perpendicular. So the same thing that we talked about before. Perpendicular lines have the product of their slopes is -1. If the product of their slopes is -1, then they are perpendicular. So it's biconditional. Any horizontal line and vertical line are perpendicular. So a horizontal line is perpendicular to any vertical line. So rather than saying that their product is -1, what you guys probably remember from Algebra 1 is that slopes of perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. So opposites are talking about the sign. If it's positive, then the opposite is negative. If it's negative, the opposite is positive. And the reciprocal, all you do is you take your numerator and denominator and you switch those. So the reciprocal of this one will be y over x. So opposite reciprocal is when they're perpendicular. So we won't talk about this -1 probably ever again because it's easier to remember that it's opposite reciprocal. So find the opposite reciprocal to all these slopes. So remember, the opposite is the sign. So 2/3 is positive, so the opposite is negative, and then 3/2. Now, for me personally, I always put the negative with the numerator. I think that makes it a little bit easier. Now, the next one is just 2. Well, remember, if you don't have a fraction, you can make any number a fraction by putting it over 1. So now the opposite reciprocal, the opposite is negative. The reciprocal is 1/2. Now, again, I don't care if you put -1/2 or if you put -1/2 is fine. Technically, 1/-2 is also fine, but we don't usually do that. So I don't care which way you put it. Just make sure you're careful with that. -7, so again, put that over 1. So it's negative, so we're going to make that positive, and then it's 1/7. -1/6. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, where I always just put the negative with the numerator, and the reason is because this problem, a lot of people put it with the numerator and with the denominator, and that's not right. -1 over -6 is actually +1/6, because negative over negative, negative divided by negative is a positive. So you can either put it up with the numerator or put it with the denominator, but not both. So I just always put it up with the numerator. So this is actually -1/6. So the opposite reciprocal is +6/1. Which is just 6. I don't care how you write it. I'd rather you put it this way, but 6/1 is good. And 1, that's 1/1. So this is positive. The reciprocal, or the opposite is negative. The reciprocal is 1/1, which is just -1. And the last one, this one's a little bit confusing because it's 0. Well, if you put it over 1, it's still 0. So what is the slope that's perpendicular to 0? Well, remember, 0 is a horizontal line. So a perpendicular line to that would be vertical, which means the slope would be undefined. That one's a hard one, so try to make sure you remember that. A zero slope is horizontal, so a vertical line would be perpendicular, which means that slope is undefined. So let's look at these and see. Now, one thing I like about number one right away is they put where the slope is a whole number and the y-intercept is a fraction. A lot of people get tricked by that because they're used to looking for the fraction for the slope. No, your slope is always with your x. So we have 2 and -2. Now, again, the hard part with this one is a lot of people look at this and say, oh, yeah, they're opposite reciprocals. Well, they're opposites. This one's positive, this one's negative, but they're not reciprocals. So they are not perpendicular. And remember, that's the symbol for perpendicular we'll use. So this one, we have -1/2, so -1/2. The opposite reciprocal would be 2 over +1 or +2/1, which is 2. This one's negative. So again, now they're reciprocals, but they're not opposite reciprocals. So that's, again, not perpendicular. So now we have -1/2 and 2x. So again, -1/2. The opposite reciprocal is +2/1, which is 2. So this one is both opposite and reciprocal, or you could do the other way around. 2/1, the opposite reciprocal is -1/2. It all is the same. So these are perpendicular. So now we're going to write these equations that are parallel or perpendicular. The biggest thing is you have to make sure you find your slope, and then it goes through this point. So it's really the same thing we did the other day, and we're doing this in slope-intercept form. And remember, one of the things I want to make sure you guys get used to, because a lot of people miss this when they do it this way, your answer is in slope-intercept form. So y is equal to, we need to find the slope, and we need to find the y-intercept. I always do that before I even start my problem. That way you don't mess anything up and sub in things that are wrong. So write the equation line that's parallel to this one. Well, again, this line, really all we need is a slope. So the slope they give me, I always call it my old slope, is -2. So my new slope is, it's parallel, so it's the exact same. So it's also -2. So now it's the exact same thing we did in the last lesson, a slope of -2. That goes through this point. So I have, this is my x and my y. So remember, I sub that into y is equal to mx plus b, and the whole point is we're finding b. Now, one thing, we know what our new slope is, so I can go ahead and put that in my answer if I want to. But all we're looking for now is b. So I have my y is 3 from that ordered pair. My m is my slope is my -2. My x is from my ordered pair, and then we don't know b. That's what we're trying to find. And that's where a lot of people, that's what they put as their answer, and we need the answer, y is equal to mx plus b. So now we just solve for b. -2 times -2 is +4. Subtract 4 from both sides, you get -1. So -1, if you just want to circle that as your answer, that's great. I would rather you clean it up a little bit and put x -1. But again, a lot of people, the thing that they do wrong is finally when they get their B, they plug things back in, but they accidentally use this. And again, it is confusing because we use this ordered pair in this step, but then we don't use that ordered pair in our answer. So I get where it's confusing. So I think it helps right away to put this where you're going to put your answer. Write an equation for the line that is parallel to y is equal to -1/2x plus 10 and passes through -2, 4. So this is really nitpicky, but I think someone was being lazy and they didn't want to write out the fraction -1/2. So technically this should be in parentheses because the way it's written is -1/2x, which is not correct. That's not what we're doing at all. So I'm just going to rewrite this as y is equal to -1/2x plus 10. A lot of you guys probably didn't notice that at all, but just to be mathematically specific. Now again, it's parallel, so my old slope was -1/2. My new slope is the exact same. It's parallel, so parallel lines have the same slope. And again, you don't need to show me that, but I'm going to get you used to that, or I'm going to keep doing that, because of perpendicular, it does help out a lot. So my slope is -1/2. This is my ordered pair, my x and my y. And again, I should have done this already, but before I do any of this math, my answer, y is equal to blank x plus my y-intercept. So plug these numbers in. My y is 4. My slope is -1 over 2. My x is -2. Plus b, we're finding our y-intercept. We already have our slope, so we could write that in here if we wanted. We're looking for our y-intercept. So -1/2 times -2, if you want to, remember when you multiply, you can make the -2 into a fraction, and then you just multiply straight across. That's +2 over +2, which is 1. Or, again, there's a fraction button in your calculator. If you let me know, I can show you what that is and where that's at. I think it's n over d on your calculator. But let me know, because you can do that in your calculator. It makes it a lot easier. So my y-intercept is 3, so that goes as our +3, so that goes in here. So that is your answer. Again, if you want to clean it up and get rid of those underlines, you can, but you do not have to. Write an equation of a line that is perpendicular to y is equal to x plus 1 and passes through. So now it's perpendicular. So now this is where I think this is really helpful. The old slope, if it's just x, remember it's 1x, so that's just 1. So my new slope is the opposite reciprocal. So this was positive, so I knew it's negative. And then remember, this is 1 over 1. So when you take the reciprocal, it's 1 over 1, which is just 1. So the opposite reciprocal is just 1. Again, my answer, y is equal to blank x plus blank. And we're using this ordered pair as my x and y. So y is equal to mx plus b. My y is 8. My slope is -1. My x is 5. And we're solving for b. So 8 is equal to -5 plus b. Add 5. My b is equal to 13. So my slope is -1. My y-intercept is 13. Now again, -1x, if you want to write it just as -x, that makes it look a little bit more clean. That's what they would do when they write it. But either one of these I'll accept as the answer. If you put -1x, that's fine. It looks a little bit different, but that's completely okay. So this one, they write in kind of a different order. It passes through this point, and it's perpendicular to this. Again, it's the same thing we've been doing. My old slope is +2. My new slope, the opposite makes that negative. And then, again, if you want to make that a fraction, it's 2 over 1. So the reciprocal is 1 over 2. So that's the slope I'm using. So y is equal to -1 over 2x plus my y-intercept. Now I just have to find my y-intercept. And same thing as before, using that ordered pair. My y is, now a lot of people, this is a mistake, a lot of people for their y, they say it's 3 from this y-intercept. Once you get your slope, we're done with that. All we need that equation for is the slope. So that's what we already have. So the y is, remember from our ordered pair, -5 is equal to -1 over 2x. Oops, sorry. -1 over 2. The x is 6 plus b. -1/2 times 6. Again, you could use a calculator, but -1/2 times 6 is -3. If you want to do it that way, you can. Add 3 to both sides. We get -2 is equal to b. So again, I'd prefer you rewrite it -1/2 x minus 2. But again, you don't have to. If you leave it like this, I will give you every single point. You will not miss anything if you put plus -2. So how about this one? Are L1 and L2 parallel, perpendicular, or neither, and explain. So find the slope of each one of those. Now they give you these ordered pairs, and so you could do the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and you could do it that way. But instead, let's just find the slope like normal. So to go from this point to this one, I guess this is L2, so let's do L1 first. So I always go from my left to my right. You don't have to. But the slope is just your rise over run. So I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's -6 over, then to my right, 1, 2, 3, 4, -6 over 4. And then my L2, I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I go up 6. and then I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is that right? Yep. So before you do anything else, before we can see if they are parallel or perpendicular, make sure you reduce these slopes, because a lot of people, sometimes they'll be parallel and they won't realize it because they didn't reduce. So if I divide both of these by 2, it's -3 over 2. And then this other one, if I divide both by 3, it's 2 over 3. See, I was recounting everything because I thought I made a mistake. But when you reduce these, now you can see the slopes are opposite reciprocal. One of them is -3 over 2. This one is positive, so the signs are opposite, and then it's 2 over 3. So they are perpendicular. That is not spelled right at all here, mathematically. Perpendicular. Now we're going to talk about horizontal and vertical lines, and this is where you have to use your head a little bit, but it's really easy. If you can point this out, or if you can figure this out, then the math is really, really easy, but it's really sneaky, and you have to remember. So vertical line and a horizontal line are perpendicular. Vertical and horizontal lines obviously are perpendicular. Write an equation that's perpendicular to y is equal to -2, and it goes through the point 1,5. Well, y is equal to -2. Remember that y, if it's y is equal to, that is a horizontal line. Remember, y is equal to horizontal, and x is equal to is vertical. So I want a line that is perpendicular to a vertical line, so I want a horizontal line, and it goes through this point. Well, if it's horizontal and it goes through that point, we just said, we want it perpendicular to the horizontal. So we want a vertical line. Well, if it's a vertical line, it's x is equal to something. Well, if we're given this ordered pair, it's got to be x is equal to 1, because that is the x value, is 1. That's it. So again, horizontal lines are always perpendicular to vertical lines, and so we have a horizontal line at -2. That means x is equal to 1. Now, the good news is, if you forget which one is which one's horizontal, which one's vertical, if they're perpendicular, it's going to be the opposite. So this is y is equal to, so my answer's got to be x is equal to, because it's perpendicular, and then it's x is equal to your x value. So you didn't even have to know which one's vertical and which one's horizontal necessarily. This one, the equation is parallel to x is equal to. Well, if it's parallel, it's still going to be x. X is equal to, and so then we do our x value. Now again, x is equal to is vertical, so we want another vertical line, so we got to be x is equal to. Write an equation perpendicular to x is equal to 8. Again, x is equal to means if it's perpendicular, we want y is equal to. We want the opposite. Well, now my y value is 2, so y is equal to 2. Now again, x is equal to is a vertical line, so I want a horizontal line. That's why we picked y is equal to. But again, the shortcut is, if it's perpendicular, we want the opposite of whatever they say. And again, make sure you realize the reason I know, they don't say anything about these lines being vertical or horizontal, but the reason I know is because it's not in slope-intercept form. It's just x is equal to a number or y is equal to a number. There's no slope. There's nothing there. It's just x is equal to a number, y is equal to a number. If it's x, it's vertical. If it's y, it's horizontal. Write the equation line parallel to y is equal to. So again, parallel means it's the same. And my y value is -7. Make sure you're making the y value on that. So again, ours is a horizontal line, y is equal to a 5. We want one down here, -7. So if you have any questions, make sure you let me know. Those horizontal and vertical lines are a little bit tricky, and they sneak up on you, and they don't happen a lot, so a lot of people forget about them. But if you notice them, they're actually really a lot easier than some of them, or at least the math is really quick. You don't have to do a lot of figuring out.